After e4, e6, d4, d5, and knight c3, the French is on the board, and black, in this video we're going through black playing c5, which is the French martial variation. So now we take the pawn in d5, and the main option we're going to go through is to take the pawn back in d5, but there's also a popular one, which is to take the pawn in d4. Let's go through this first. Pawn takes in d4 with an immediate attack on the knight. There was a time in my life when I used to take the pawn in e6, and then when black takes the knight, then I used to take the pawn in f7, which is a crazy game. And I've won plenty of games like that, but it's not really correct. And if black plays well, then white is done a piece. The best move right now is bishop to b5 check. This can be blocked in two ways, bishop d7 or knight d7. We're not going to go through moves like king e7 or knight c6, for very obvious reasons. When the bishop blocks, white now recaptures the pawn in d4, and white is just better. Remember that this variation, the French martial variation, is rubbish. But I've decided to make a video because I'm tired of not knowing it very well. So either way, now it's all about retaining the advantage. So let's just look at a few moves on how to consolidate the advantage. If pawn takes in d5, which is the best move, then simply swap. Bishop takes, queen takes, or knight takes. Either way, this pawn is lost, right? So white is up a pawn. And now we're also going to swap queens. If queen moves, then you can just develop the knight. For example, if queen gives a check and then castle, and the two knights are defending each other, so that's fine. So let's place on the developing move for black, knight f6. Then you just trade, and after knight takes, bishop to e3. And again, we're just winning. So there will be not much point in looking at this because we know that we're going to win the game because of the majority on the queen side. Let's look at the best moves by black and see how to finish this off. Knight g4 attacking the bishop. Bishop to d4 is crucial. And after castling, for instance, now black doesn't have to play these moves, but again, this is just to quickly continue the line to see what the ideas are. h3 attacking the knight has to go, and after knight to e5, for instance, white will castle long and will carry on with the game. So even black playing the most aggressive moves isn't really paying anything to the black player. Bishop e7, developing the bishop, knight d5, attacking it, and after rook h to e8, the development of the black player is finished, playing the most accurate moves by black. But still, white's best move now is to win another pawn. If black hadn't played that move, we were attacking the bishop, but if black hadn't developed the bishop, then still we're attacking the pawn. If black plays something like this to defend the pawn, or maybe moves the king, white simply carries on with knight e2 and rook e1 and so on. So let's make a recap. Like, the reason why I can't really show many lines in this variation is because it's just such a stupid variation. c5, right? You take the pawn, they take you, then you give a check. And after bishop blocks, now you can take the pawn d4. This is just a clean pawn down. The black player has gambled for no reason whatsoever. So let's look at this other variation, for example. Bishop takes, then knight takes back. There's just really nothing happening here. A move like a6, these are just moves that are supposed to indicate how the game will pretty much go. And I think this is it's good to signal the importance of development, because the black player isn't developed at all. And here the best move is to take the pawn in e6 with an attack on f7. The knight is defending the queen. So if queen takes, then you can just give a check, recapture the queen. It's just the advantage continues to increase. Let's look at this variation where the knight is taken, then pawn takes with check. King e7, this is completely lost already. The best move now is to take the knight with promotion in a knight, which gives a check. And if rook takes, then bishop g5 skewers the queen. So after the king goes back, after the check, then simply queen check in e4, and then king goes to f7. That's just really nothing for the knight lost in b5. I mean, right now we're basically almost equal in material. We're 2 pawns up, but we have a knight that is trapped. So let's see how to finish this off. Queen b7 check, and to save the rook, black has to play knight to d7, and now queen d5 check, saving our knight as well. King to g6, queen check again from d3, king f7, queen to b3. Again, we gotta keep our piece, otherwise we're losing material. We gotta be careful. King back to e8, and now queen e6 check. Queen cannot block because of the knight, so after bishop blocks, white continues with knight to e2, and we'll use the material advantage to win this game. Our queen is safe in e6. A move like knight f8 cannot be played because of the check. Knight d7, then you can take the bishop in e7. When the queen takes back, you can win the rook. That's just an example. So let's go from the start and let's look at some other more serious variations, if serious is what they can be called, even though it's just a terrible defense. So take the pawn in d5, and we're looking at the variation where the pawn is in d4, takes in d4. So bishop b5 check. What happens after knight blocks in d7? Very simply, just carry on and grab the extra pawn. After a move like a6, the bishop goes to a4, still keeping the pin. And we're threatening to take in e6 and break the pawn structure, and it's going to be just terrible for black. A move like b5, it gives birth to another seriously interesting variation, which is very similar to before. You ignore it, right? You give a piece once again, attacking this pawn. So if there's something instructive you want to take out of this video, is how to play against the marshal, not only memorizing the variations, but also see how the patterns go, right? There's this weakness on e6 and f7 and creating this weak diagonal, typical. So if black takes the bishop after we take the knight, for instance, or we could take the pawn in f7, it's up to you. King takes, then you got queen d5, making a fork. Either way, black will just have a bad pawn structure. We're going to equalize or probably win more material after this. So let's look at straight away the variation where black just takes back and keeps the attack on our piece. Now queen to e4, attacking the rook, and after rook to b8, saving the rook, queen takes with check. After queen blocks, white continues with bishop to b3. So a swap is favorable for white because we're up in material and the position is better. So let's keep developing pieces for the black player. Knight g to f6. White continues with bishop f4, attacking the rook. And the position is just evaluated as if white is just like in complete control of the game. Swapping queens, for example, just favors white. If black doesn't do it, then he can never develop the bishop or castle. After rook to b6, for example, white simply goes back to h3. And after black finishes development, bishop to b4, threatening to break the pawn structure, white plays knight to e2, important move. And now the game carries on, castle and long castle. So the black players played the absolute best moves in such a variation, the a6 b5 variation, but it didn't go anywhere because white also played the best move, and because black's defense is bad, the white player is just gonna take the upper hand. Let's conclude this line by just showing what happens after a move like knight to h5. White continues with knight to d5, which was a threat. If bishop had taken the knight, you can just take back. You still have the knight going to an excellent square. You're threatening to make a fork afterwards with then an attack on the knight. It's just too strong. You can give up this bishop, play knight d5, attacking this and this, and there's no way for black to save material. If knight takes bishop, then you just take back. You still have this threat going on. But again, there's just so many lines that can happen, so there's no way to analyze them all. Let's just take into account the fact that this opening here, this specific defense, simply loses by force. So we take the pawn in d5. Let's very briefly look at this other silly move, which is knight to f6. Try to get some development. If pawn takes, then black takes back with the bishop, and it's really not that bad for black. White now goes on with the usual move, bishop b5 check, and after bishop blocks, now we can take back. If the knight had blocked, then it would have been the same thing. We can take back. We can take the pawn in e6, creating the same damage. And now again, if bishop takes, remember you got this situation zug. If not, if pawn takes back, then white continues the development with bishop to g5. We don't care about this pawn because we can take back with the queen and then castle long. It's a fantastic development. Let's look at this other scenario, which we haven't seen, something like with knight to c6. Now we can just take the pawn in c5. And that's a free pawn. You see, the bishop cannot really take this pawn in c5. It's something that so many players fall for. Now you can just take the knight in f6. It's a well-known tactic because then you're going to have a check. You can take the bishop. So once again, from the first move, knight to c3 and c5, you take in d5. So let's look at the proper move, which is pawn takes back in d5. Again, check. Same stuff. So let's look at a variation which we haven't seen, knight to c6 in this specific variation. Now white continues with pawn takes in c5, and we have created a passed pawn, which is thematic in this French marshal, but also against other moves, especially against the Sicilian when they play the e6 variation and they play d5. You can do the same thing. So if bishop takes, remember you got double attack on d5. You can trade queens and simplify the game. If queen trades, then knight d5 attack in c7 is the usual game. It's complete. It's just so good for white. So what happens after d4, stopping all of that? It's a move I encounter a lot. Now queen e2 check, and after Bishop to e7. Let's not block with the queen because it will simplify everything a little bit too much for white. Let's look at the best moves. Now white continues with knight to e4. Then after bishop to e6, continuing development, white continues with knight to h3. The idea is to go to f4 and put pressure on this bishop, because then it's going to create a backwards pawn. After knight to f6, we can take the knight. Bishop takes. It looks like the black player will be able to play a normal game, but again, all of these moves are forced, so they are going to happen inevitably. Now we got two pieces attacking e6. Besides, we're up a pawn, and black has got an isolated pawn, so we just better. After queen to d7, offering more protection to e6, white takes. And let's not look at the line where the queen takes and we simplify everything, but rather the one that is slightly more complicated when the black player decides to keep the pieces on. So pawn takes, and now castle, castle. White continues with rook to b1, getting it away from the dangerous diagonal of this bishop and ready to support the pawn in c5. A move like a6 is met by bishop to d3. It will be just crazy to give away the bishop pair in an open endgame. We have absolutely no reason to do that. So black going to b4 now. It looks like it's attacking here and here. White continues with bishop to c4, putting more pressure on e6 and defending a2. So after black continues with the best move, which is knight to d5, white simply develops to d2. Let's remember that I'm just showing these lines to see how the game will pretty much look like, but there's like a billion different moves that can happen now, something that I specify in every one of my videos. So let's just remember that we have an advantage. Extra pawn, black has the backward pawn, we got the bishop pair. So it's not that it's pointless to continue this, it's just to give an indication of how he would probably continue. If it doesn't continue exactly like that, and it probably won't, just remember all the weaknesses of the opponent, the advantages you have, and how pretty much the pieces are placed in this endgame. After rook a to c8, attacking the pawn, white can continue with b4, as we mentioned before, right? It's not about memorizing move, it's about, remember the rook goes to b1 because black is a dark square bishop, and it's not like it was giving a threat immediately, but it's good to get it away. Also, I mentioned that you gotta play b4 to support the extra pawn, which black didn't take before in this variation because we would have taken in d5 if you remember a few minutes ago. After the best move, king to h8, getting it away from the diagonal of our bishop, white continues with rook to b3, best move. The idea is to go into f3. So after g6 and rook to f3, let's see how the black player playing the best moves is going to try and resist as long as possible, and let's see how white just crushes it. After rook f to e8 and queen to d3, the rook goes back to f8, indicating black has no better moves. Also, let's take a note on the fact that b6 cannot be played because you can take and then bishop wins another pawn. And so yeah, after rook to e1 here and rook c to d8, white continues with bishop to h6. And after best move, once again, rook to f7, white continues with queen to e4. Now finally completing the attack on the square e6. And after e5, let's look at this idea. h4 continues now, trying to dismantle the king side. I mean h4, not h5. And yeah, I think we should stop the line here. There's no reason to continue. Now you know how to survive this opening, how to go to a successful endgame. Let's just have a look at this interesting line that I happen to go through. If knight goes to c3 attacking the queen, then the best move is rook takes f6, completely ignoring the queen here. White has just won material, because then you're going to be able to pin the rook, and then you got more attackers and so on. And let's have a look at this lovely line. If knight takes queen, then simply rook takes with an attack on the queen. You're going to win in material. You're going to take the knight. The queen will have to move away, but you got this threat and then discover check threat. There's no way for the queen to get out of this. If queen to g4, for instance, then bishop check, king moves, and then rook to d7 check. And then only way to block is this, and then that's it.